Well, we've all been there. Our child's tantrum at the mall, crying on a plane, the grip of death around our legs or at our waist at drop off to an activity or to school, refusing to eat or maybe eating too much. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to parenting. Then you add in anxiety, ADD, ADHD, aggression, autism, learning disabilities, bullying, and the process can just seem overwhelming. Joining me today, parent consultant and child behavior specialist, Sylvia Corzato. Sylvia is the founder of Success in Steps. And so this brings me to welcoming you to this episode of Living Your Life with Lianne Laing, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And of course, if you have any information, great questions to ask or to check in, you can check in on extensionmarketing.com. Sylvia, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. I think I was overwhelmed knowing this topic, that we were hitting on this topic, because there were so many places to start and to go. So I want to let the listeners know, we kind of decided we're going to take it from kind of birth on, right? So if they've got preteens, they'll eventually fast forward until we get to life stages, I think, so that we can really hit on kind of the process of it all. And you were you're 17 years in this industry. You founded this company, but there was quite the story as to how you got in to eventually having this type of a company.
Correct. Yeah. It's been a journey.
I can imagine, and two kids right now too, right? So you're doing the juggling like everyone else.
Yeah, I'm everything that I preach, I practice as well,
which is important.
Yes,
but it's so funny, right? Don't you find people look at you like, okay, how is she going to handle this? What is she doing? I feel like that when I'm grocery shopping. It's kind of like, what is she putting in her grocery cart? So I'm going to look at you. You know, people are looking at you like, how is she going to handle this situation?
All the time, all the time. And you know, both when I'm more people are, you know, they see me out and about, and I get called out sometimes, which is still kind of weird. But they see me with my kids at the grocery store, and you know, if the kids ask for something, that I could feel sometimes people watching me, or even if people don't know what I do. We get this a lot when we go on family vacation. Your kids do really well at the restaurants, or your kids are really well behaved. And I'm like, thank you. And then if we get into the long conversation, then they ask me what I do for a living. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes complete sense. And then they start asking me for tips for their children. And I love offering.
That's a huge but that's a huge compliment.
Yeah, it feels really great because, you know, the joke is that the kids have been on a behavior plan since the day that they were born, because I've been in the field longer than my kids have been here with me. So,
which is good to know, right? Is that you had the study and the understanding of what it was that you were going to be doing prior to even becoming a parent.
Correct.
So what for you, I mean, growing up, happy childhood, strict parents, like what was that experience like for you?
Italian background. Not able to sleep over at anyone's house because I had my own bed type of mentality. You know, when we were growing up, you know, you asked for something, my mom just had to give me the look. She didn't even have to say no. She just gave me the look and I knew to put it down. We all did.
Siblings? How many of you?
Siblings, older sister, younger brother. Okay. I'm a middle child. We have a strong bond, me and my siblings, and my mom. And it was a fantastic childhood in respects to that. And I thought I was actually going to be a doctor when I was younger, because I would watch the, you know, TLC back then when they had the Operation channel, and I would have my lunch and watch the operation take place. My mom thought I was completely grossed out about that. I was a tomboy growing up, so very active, and just loved doing anything that was physically active, helping out people, volunteering a lot.
Was home here? Like, was home Ottawa?
Yeah, home was Ottawa. Grew up in Ottawa, born and raised here, mostly in the Hunt Club area, and now I'm in the West End. So
there was a positive experience growing up, right? There was, I mean, and I think we all have it, right? You get that look from your parent and you just know. And for me, it's like, I knew if she got to the count of 3, if we came anywhere near 3, you were in trouble. And I tend to think sometimes with my kids, I can be able to do that, but I definitely feel like it's definitely not as strict. The entire generation of when we were growing up to what I feel our kids are experiencing. But we'll hit on that.
Yeah, it's completely different. When I go back and I tell my kids, like, they asked me, well, what did Nona make you do when you were growing up? And she's like, oh my goodness.
It's like this foreign
Yeah.
world to them. Foreign world. So where did you end up studying? So if you wanted to be a doctor, what was the program that you initiated?
I actually just started biology and chemistry at Carleton. And then I was thinking about kinesiology because I was really into the whole fitness and was into fitness competitions and all that back in the days. But then I switched over once I got a touch on psychology as an elective at Carleton, and everything kind of switched.
That's interesting. So you're in for the medical program. You need to take a psychology course, and that triggered. Was it the mind? Was it the way of thinking?
It was. I always wanted to help other people. So to me, because I was so intrigued by operations, I thought that that's where I wanted to go. But then I saw how much I loved helping out people just in every day. Like I volunteered a lot. Instead of doing a frosh week, I was volunteering at the St. Vincent Hospital. I was doing all kinds of stuff in that nature. So I just took the shift because children have always been a huge delight for me. So I knew that I wanted to work then with children and families.
Okay. So was it child psychology that you ended up
Exceptional Children is what the course was called.
Exceptional Children.
Mm-hmm. And in that was like just short sentences on, autism and ADHD. Like it wasn't really a big topic. The part that took the longest, or the most in the textbook, was FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, was what they spoke about a lot during that time when I was in university.
Which I would think is very different now.
Huge difference.
Probably the education of mothers, in the consumption of, but it just seems, while that would have led to a lot of other issues for the child, now it seems like we're talking much more autism, Asperger's, ADD, ADHD as anxiety as common discussion amongst parents or teachers in schools.
Absolutely. And children don't normally get diagnosed till much later on because they're going through that developmental stage at the younger ages. And so there's a lot of things that could look like autism or ADHD and such, but we'll talk
or
more
learning
about
disabilities too, right? There's
exactly.
You're trying to figure out the layers as you're going about it. So you end up, because you spent quite a bit of time at CHEO.
Yes.
Prior to kind of branching out into your company.
Yes. So actually, if we kind of go back before that, the way I got actually into the field was that there was a posting at Carleton for looking for a therapist for a little boy on the autism spectrum. And honestly, I still get all goosebumps about it because it was that little boy when I met him. I get choked up, sorry. That when I met that little boy, I knew that my life was changing in terms of my field of my career.
So you're a student.
I was just about, so I had my psychology degree at that point.
Okay.
That was focused on child psychology. And then I was just finishing up my sociology degree that I focused on nonverbal communication. And it was during that year that I saw the posting and I was about to finish up. And, for a therapist for a child on the autism spectrum that was nonverbal.
How old was the boy?
The boy was 2.
2-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And there was a connection.
I met him. I had gone on Good Friday. I met him. I saw his blonde hair and chestnut brown eyes, and he was nonverbal, and he just stole my heart. And still to this day.
What did you feel that you were going to be able to do for this boy?
I just felt like I could help him. I saw a child that was nonverbal. I saw a way that, with the additional training to be the therapist, I thought, we could teach this kid a lot of life skills. We can break things down so that he can achieve where his parents want him to be. And I'm not a mother at this point, right? This is well before I became a mom myself, but he stole my heart, literally in every aspect. And this is a child that I started working with. He was nonverbal. We did a lot of pairing, so a lot of him trusting me and such. And then I would start making demands with teaching him and, breaking things down to small tasks, make him achieve, and then building up on that. And then I'll never forget the day that on the IKEA dry erase board, we were doing the alphabet and he started talking. And it's like, talk about reinforcement. Is there anything more rewarding than that? Like, there are other things in lives, but for me, this little boy went from being nonverbal and using pictures to communicate to speaking. And it's
like to hear his voice in that sense, like
it's.
I see the tears are welled up, and for us both, right? How many months had you been working together?
Oh, I worked with him
before that moment.
Before that moment, it was well over almost a year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Because it was April, then I got my training, and then we worked through the summer. So if I'm not mistaken, it was the spring of the following year.
You know, you think about the time invested and the trust and the work that goes into even the smallest of an accomplishment. And yet that was that was like climbing an Everest, right? For a child like that. Absolutely.
It truly was. It truly was. I'm sorry, I'm getting a tissue because I am teared up now.
So this was a long time ago.
So I still in contact with Mom every so often, or if I run in with her, and I get updates on how he's doing. I always send them an email for his birthday, September 28th. And
how long did you end up working with him?
I ended up working with him for 3 years.
Okay.
And then I was working privately, and I was working with quite a few families with their children in their home doing what we call IBI therapy, intensive behavioral intervention. So I had quite a few families. Then I worked at the school board for a short amount of time as an educational assistant, thinking that to just expand my knowledge and to a little bit of a shift, as a lot of my kids that I was working with were going to school heading into the school.
If you think about it, you meet this young boy at 3 years, that they're off into the school system.
Exactly. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make the switch into the school system as well. That didn't last very long because as an educational assistant, no disrespect to educational assistant or anything by any means, but just as being a therapist, I felt like I was very constricted in what I was able to do. And so I wanted to do more. But the way that I got into CHEO was that it was kind of odd, actually. I didn't have any intentions to leave the school board, but one of the families that I worked with privately sent my resume to CHEO, and then I got a call from CHEO for a job position as an instructor therapist there. And then it was just kind of like, whoa, what do I do? And so I ended up going to CHEO and spent 10 years in a variety of different positions in the autism program there.
It was serendipitous then, that you'd had a family that believed in the work as to sending a resume without you.
Yeah, and I still to this day don't know who that family was. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah, I could never got to thank them or anything. Like, I didn't know. And I remember...
The hospital never said?
No. The hospital never said.
Wow.
So it was kind of weird. Like, I had applied a few times there. But there was a conversation of a family also. So it was really weird.
But this was the start, because 10 years is a nice run, and especially at CHEO, where did you have access to different kinds of families, different programs, different research, different implementation of therapies? What were you able to experience there?
So I started off as an instructor therapist and did a lot of training in early intervention with applied behavioral analysis. I got access to a lot of different courses. I got to be supervised by so many amazing psychologists. I learned so much from them during the supervision time. They would come and supervise weekly. I just grew as a professional through CHEO. And then in the field that I was working in, as a therapist, there's book smart, but it's really hands-on. You have to be able to put everything into place and to apply the strategies. And it's not always easy when you're dealing with nonverbal children, when you're dealing with aggression, with non-compliance. So you really have to be paired, like motivated with the child in order to get that compliance. So
there had to have been a payoff for you. There had to have been.
I just found it so rewarding. Like, honestly, to me, because we had to do a lot of data at the end of every day, I just found it so rewarding when I was able to accomplish something with a child. To me, that's what the whole job gave back to me. It's like, I am doing this to provide this child with this skill. So let's break it down and let's work together and let's motivate. And it was just honestly the most rewarding thing that I was doing at that time.
When you're dealing with autistic children or nonverbal, and there's a medical, there's a lot that goes on there, but then to be able to have had that experience, and then to realize that there's a lot of different components to parenting and to becoming a behavioral specialist. Did you just feel like there were so many parents coming at you with so many different questions and so many different things that you saw expanding your practice out was the way you wanted to go? Was there an end to the CHEO? Because I looked at your website, and like, you cover such a spectrum of issues that you were so focused on that at CHEO to branch out. Well,
I'll give you a little Cole's note. It wasn't my thought. I thought that I'd be working at CHEO like to the end of my career. So I always knew, once I started deciding that I wanted to work with children and family, I always thought that, and this is when I was in 20s, right? In my 20s, I'm in my 40s now. So it's like, when I'm like, okay, by the time I'm 40, I want to have my own business, is what I thought back then. So like, really weird that actually happened. But so I worked at CHEO. I was an instructor therapist for a really long time. And then I had an accident at work, which left me not being able to work with the kids anymore. And it was a really hard time for me because I really loved what I did. But I was off work for a year, and I was paralyzed on the left side for a really long time. Okay. So yeah, this is stuff that we don't share on the website, because I don't need everyone to...
I thought I had done some research here.
I'm a pretty private person. But...
Do you mind? I mean, that's such a personal thing, but such a life-altering, life-changing. So can I ask about it? Or...
Yeah, what happened basically was that I was in a behavior with a child for over 2.5 hours. And I injured myself at work by blocking myself, and my body was exhausted at that point. And when I had twisted to protect myself, so I felt something pop in my lower back, and I didn't feel right after that. So I started having some tingling in my legs and such. And so I was off for 3 months for physio and all kinds of stuff. Got back to work, and then re-injured. I guess I wasn't fully recovered. And it was the simplest thing of a child. We were waiting in line to go to the snack room, and I was holding his hand, and all of a sudden he flopped on the floor. And just the way he flopped unexpectedly made my back do the same thing. And then I was off for a full year doing all kinds of things. And without going into too many details, it was quite the whirlwind, because they thought there was other complications, but then it ended up being my back.
I never would have thought. I mean, to have a type of aggression that you're physically exhausted, that you're physically exhausted at your job, not only mentally having to stay focused on the work that needs to be done, but to be able to protect yourself. It's difficult to comprehend.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, and I hope you don't mind me having this thought, I'm thinking, you're having one session with this child. What are these parents having to deal with 24 hours a day? I have this compassion for you. Like, my gosh, you're at work and you're doing this therapy session. And I'm thinking, this was one day, one session.
Yeah.
What you must take to sympathize or to understand what these parents deal with.
And so that was a huge component into moving forward. And I have to just say that any therapist that is listening to this, I think that all therapists are amazing. What we do as therapists, we put our heart and soul. If you stay in, there's a lot of therapists that try, and it's not their line of work, but those that are, and nothing against them, by the way, but those that are, I have a lot of friends, a lot of people that I still know at CHEO, and people in the private sector as well as a therapist, like it is tough work. So you're in it for the right reasons, right? A lot of them just, it's rewarding to see how these kids can excel. But yeah, you think about, I have the strategies and the tools to help these children. I know how to be consistent. I know how to act and how to follow through if it's for a certain function of behavior. And then I thought, it's when I became a mom myself that I thought, oh my goodness, like I had the tools for my daughter that was colic for 8.5 months. Mind you, the behavior principles couldn't really apply in that respect, but it did later on in life for her. But I used to always think, because that expression, you don't know what it's like to be a mother until you're a mother yourself. I didn't really get that. My mom used to always say that to me. But I would hear the parents, they would come to us the next day, and a drop off, and they would, we'd ask them how their night was and all those kind of things, or anything we need to know. And a lot of times, parents would break down, or, they would share their challenges. And that's just the relationship that we had with parents. And I think it's great that they shared it with us so that we knew how we could best support their child. But what I found very difficult was when I would hear that parents would try what they saw us do in therapy at home and they were unsuccessful. That really pulled at my heartstrings quite a bit. And after I came back from work, of my year off, I was not able to go back to working with the children one-on-one for obvious reasons that I could really hurt myself permanently. So then I started up the ABA program with the project manager and loved that. And then I became an administrator for that program to set it all up with the Ministry of Children and Youth Services for that. And then I became an instructor, an intake worker, whereby I'm putting family plans together and listening to families' priority needs and doing the whole CANS, which is the Child and Adolescence Needs and Strength Assessment tools, like doing all that. And I love that because I felt like I was able to help parents, I was able to help children, but then I would still hear the same thing, right? A lot of great services for my children. And the program's really great, but I'm still at a loss for myself.
Right. It's how do you implement what you're doing in these programs, but be able to implement the other 23 hours of the day
exactly
at home.
And there was such a wait list for the actual service. So I got to have a chat with them at their intake, but then they'd have to wait 18 to 24 months for services.
18 to 24 months.
At the time, yeah. So the autism program, as we know, is a little bit different.
It's different now, but
existing.
I remember hosting events and galas for some of these programs. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you develop Success in Steps.
Well, I developed Success in Steps because the government had a lot of cuts to the hospital. And I never saw this coming. I was in an intake worker position. I was loving what I was doing. I thought, okay, this is like the happy medium. I'm not able to work with the kids directly anymore, but I'm able to see the kids at intake. I'm able to help the families. And then I get laid off.
Okay.
So I tell you, it's like...
So there's a reinvention.
There's a reinvention.
But so much experience, so much knowledge.
Yes.
So much of the frustrating parts of what parents weren't able to do.
Exactly.
And so I think what you've done is brilliant in terms of being able to offer these services through your company and through the work that you do.
Thank you. So when I got laid off, at that point, I thought that there was going to be something else available for me in the hospital position-wise, but we were at the very end of the layoffs. I got bumped out of my position. I didn't see it anywhere coming, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not ready to stop doing what I'm doing. I absolutely love what I'm doing. Okay, I saw the areas that were pulling at my heartstring. I ended up doing some additional training for counseling children and adolescents because in applied behavioral analysis, it doesn't really focus a lot on the emotional regulation component of things and attachment theory and all those kind of things. So I got further studies on that. And then I did a certification in my coaching as well. And then I started Success in Steps.
And this brings us to any parent Googling on the internet going, help.
Yeah.
help with, and then you've got the checklist of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so this really brought you into having to work full spectrum with a lot of different issues. While it was very hands-on with the autism aspects, this branched out into everything.
Yes.
And I remember, because we were chatting in the bathroom before we even got in here, a lot of it is understanding behavior and putting limitations, restrictions on it early on, which I think a lot of us now who have older kids are like, why didn't I do this earlier? Why didn't we implement this earlier? So I'm going to go back into let's go earlier.
Yes.
And we'll start kind of with what are some of your suggestions in terms of parenting techniques or, not being too overwhelmed when we look at almost like that if we go 0 to 2, I mean, there's and then I hear all of these kind of thought leaders now saying that so much of what our adult life is like is done by the time we're 7, right? Our patterns, our thinking, our outlook. So that's a lot of responsibility on parents to figure out how things are going to look by the time that kid is 7. So let's go 0 to 2. Where's the emphasis for you? This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach, guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
So I'm actually going to take it just before 0 to 2. And when you're talking about people normally talk before they get married, do you want to have kids, right? Because if one partner really wants to have kids and the other, it might be a deciding factor, right? But after the fact, like when you're pregnant, talking about how you were raised as a child, how I was raised, how you were raised are completely different. But how we were raised will play an impact on how we raise our children. So if our family was really strict, we might want to be like, I don't want to be that strict with my children because I didn't like the way my family was strict. So we have to be on the same page in terms of for partners to be raising their children, because it's okay to have differences, but they can't be so far away from each other, because that's when you're also going to fall into some problems.
So those discussions need to happen.
They do need
prior
to happen.
to.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like we need to sit down and talk. It's like, oh, so when you got in trouble, what happened? And normally those kind of things come out when you're dating, right? You hear all kinds of stories and such, but then you can also see how their relationships are with their parents as they're older, and seeing where the respect.
Have you dealt with parents in your office that are coming from completely different backgrounds, and arguments are happening based on they disagree with how each of them is handling situations?
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's getting parents to understand why the behavior is happening and what's maintaining it. And that's what I really do with families. I look at what the parent's strengths and needs are, and on top of what the child's strengths and needs are, so that when I'm providing them with strategies, it's very much tailored to their family. So what I do for one family is not the same for what I do for another family. I really look at what their strengths and needs are. I look at what their values are. I look at what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do in terms of consequences and such for discipline. I use a positive approach. But that discussion, I go really in depth at our very first meeting, so that I have an understanding, okay, this is where we need to go. But then I also get a sense from the parents where they see the challenges. And like I always tell them, no judgment on my part, just the more you share with me, the better I'm able to help you. Okay. So going to 0 to now, it really starts off, what I always tell families all the time: clear expectations, consistency, and boundaries. If you have those 3 things established at the very beginning, and obviously when you're 0 to 2, like there's not that many things that you can put in place. But at the same time, there is, right? If your child is whining to have a cookie when they're, 18 months, and all of a sudden you don't want them to whine and you give them a cookie right away, well, we just taught them that we can whine and get a cookie, right? So it's those little things like that develop into challenges later on, because we're kind of establishing some learned behavior there.
Do you have you seen differences in how parents have approached the sleep? Rather let them, when you ask that question, did you let them cry in the crib or did you go and soothe right away? Can you tell the difference?
Yes, I can. And parents will often, so when I do the intake with them, I do ask them like, do you problem solve for them or do you allow them to problem solve for themselves? How long do you go before you help them out? So, there's so many different terminologies now. There's the helicopter parent. There's a new one that came out, the snow plowing.
Oh yeah, I did hear that.
Yeah, so I don't use that term. It just seems a really odd term.
I do use helicopter parents though sometimes in my own private discussions.
So and so we have to provide the way we grew up and the way kids are growing up nowadays is so different. And nowadays, for even the younger kids, there's just too many structured, organized events whereby we have to give them time to play and be creative, to fumble, to scrape a knee, to try different things. But we're always so cautious. We want to bubble wrap them, and they need to be exposed to certain things to build resilience, to know how to problem solve and such. So 0 to 2 is, just to go back to that, is really to establish what are your household rules? What are the boundaries? What are they allowed and not allowed to do? Because at 18 months, they're talk by 2. They're starting to use their words. This is when we can.
This is the terrible. Then you can bring in like the terrible 2s.
I call them the terrific 2s. I like to keep it a positive spin on everything.
Yeah, I like it.
So the terrific 2s.
Yay, terrific 2s.
Yeah.
Yay.
It's when they're exploring. It's like, me do it, right? The 2 to 3s, it's me do it. It's I can do it. It's all kinds of things of me, and me want, and I don't want to share, and all those kind of things. So it's really teaching our kids, taking them aside and teaching them in the moment, modeling to our kids. Absorb so much from us that we don't even realize. You see it more when they're older because they're mimicking you. Like I always leave notes for my kids on I put a frame and turn it into a dry erase board, and I leave them either it's a to-do list or little notes. And this morning, actually, as I was in my home office, I saw a little note from my daughter. So it's amazing how they model what you do. So when the kids are young, pay attention to what you do, because even though they're not really able to communicate, they are absorbing. Our children absorb 80% of what we do visually, like communication wise, 80% visually and 20% is auditory. So they'll absorb something visually first, like TV, right? Or pictures, or what we're doing.
Or when you talk about what we're doing now, and this is something we never grew up with or didn't have the experience of us, is the phones. Oh. It's our smartphones, right? They see us. So is it, that's where our interest lies, that we're not, ignoring or not focused on our children.
Yeah.
Thank God I didn't have my smartphone when I was in the years that I was taking my kids to the park, because they would probably have fallen 1,000 times. I think of where our attention focus is.
Mm-hmm. I have a love-hate relationship with electronics. Now, again, no judgment on my part. Families do what works for them. I don't believe that that children should have an electronic at such a young age. I get it. It's great to be a distractor at times and used,
But now we see that because there's educational programs and they're learning, and so we justify, I think, a little bit more. But and I'm talking like the 2, 3, or 4-year-olds, right? Like they're on them. They're designed for them.
I saw a stroller that had this this thing that you can attach to it, so you could put your iPad attached to it. I was flabbergasted. And anyways, my own thoughts on that, right? Because what's happening with electronics is that the kids are instant gratification, that high rise in dopamine. They get overstimulated. And then when you take the device away, it's not that the child's misbehaving for they could be, right? There could be challenged for other things, but a lot of the time it's just that they have a sensory overload and they don't know what to do and they can't communicate that.
I'm so sad about the stroller, because usually the walks, right? You're putting your child in usually to go for a walk. And then you would think the sensory overload that you're looking for is the trees and the skies and the grass birds. And the colors and nature. And if they're doing that with an iPad in front of them,
they're living with blinders on.
And then we get angry with them later on for this learned behavior.
Exactly.
And we're a lot of the time to blame.
Dr. Michael Chang from CHEO, I highly recommend people to go and check out the article that the Citizen did. He did 2 different interviews for that. They're also on my Facebook page for Success and Steps, all about the effects of electronics and the mental health of our children, and his recommendation timelines for how long children should have access and when they should start having access to electronic. It's a huge part of our children's mental health from the time that they're 2, and even I see it with my kids and their friends. There's a huge difference on the way the kids behave, how they're the instant gratification component. There's so many different things, and while there's a lot of positive things that social media and electronics provide to us, there's a lot more detrimental stuff that's happening as well, and our mental health for both adults and children is paying the price for it.
Okay, so Sylvia, let's say someone's listening to this podcast and they have a 4-year-old at home who's been for the last couple of years accustomed to having their iPad for the sensory overload. And so they're saying, okay, I'm going to try to limit and take away. And then they're doing that. And then the child has a massive tantrum. So then you're starting into the behavioral aspect of what's your implementation for that? Like, so when you talked about those 3 components that parents need to stick by.
So whenever we're trying to switch the way that we're responding to things. So for that would be the function of that behavior would be access to a tangible. So to the electronic. And you can't just take something away and not provide your child with anything, right? So it's a matter of limiting. So you have to start scaling back on the electronic. You can't just go cold turkey because they won't understand that at 4 years old. But saying that you can have the iPad after dinner and the timer's on for 30 minutes. So it's set times whereby they can have it. So it's not just whenever they ask for it. And then if the electronic's not available, you tell them so the iPad's not available right now. You can play with your Lego or you can go play outside. Which one would you like? So then now, this is just assuming that the child enjoys playing with Lego and enjoys playing outside. So you want something else to offer that's highly preferred, that's comparable to the electronic. You wouldn't say you can't play on, you can't have the iPad, but you can go clean your room or you can go put away the dishes, right? Like at 4 years old, mind you, they wouldn't do that. Actually, sorry, that's not a good example, but it's a matter, you can clean up your toys or you can go and read a book. If a child's not motivated to do that, then you're going to fall into some problems.
The one thing that I noticed that you did do, though, is that you gave 2 options.
Always provide 2 options. Yep.
Not endless options or not
endless options. So it's always, whenever something's not available, and this goes for any age, I still do this for my 12-year-old. You can have this or you can have that. Which one would you like? And then if they were to say, well, I'd rather do this, and if that's an option, then I say go for it. You know, like, yeah, that's a great option.
But it's 2.
It's always 2.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're removing something from them, and you want them to feel like they're in control of what they select. So if you just say you can't have that, but you can have this, well, they're like, well, I don't want that. I want the iPad. And then that's when, the meltdown really starts happening. Whereas if you provide 2 highly preferred items and they say, I don't want that, but I want this, and if that's okay with you, say, yeah, that's a great idea. Go for it. And so you're redirecting them to something else. And that's how you can diffuse a meltdown for something that they had wanted before.
Might be a little bit different with your 12-year-old and the 4-year-old, but it's starting to implement that right now. And how early do you want the interventions to start? Like that you believe that these learned behaviors need to be dealt with?
So as young as 2, you can start implementing, very, they're not strict. You just want to establish some sort of order in your household. And you want to have some consistency. When I talk about the parents, is having the same amount of consistency. So if you're with mom, there's certain expectations. If you're with dad, maybe the expectations look a little bit different, but the follow through is always the same. So that way you don't get into, well, mom lets me do it this way or dad lets me do this way. And then that can trigger a behavior as well.
The follow through.
The follow through. Follow through is really important.
We're getting into school age children. When do you realize because we were talking about behavioral and you've dealt with autism and when do you start to kind of go, my child, and we all do this, we do the comparison.
Absolutely.
Sammy
Sammy
down the street is already walking.
Yeah.
Sammy down the street is already talking.
Yeah.
Sammy's reading, and you could be at the 4, 5, 6 and we compare, and then you're worried, and then you're calling your doctor saying, my Susie's not doing this, right? How healthy or unhealthy is that?
It can be both ways, right? It's not great to compare. And what's really hard is when you start comparing your oldest to your second child or your third, like you start comparing amongst your kids. I say don't do that. We all develop at different stages. We do have to look at red flags, such as talk by 2. Right? They need to have a few words by 2. And eye contact, that's a big one, particularly when we're talking about children on the autism spectrum. If they don't respond to their name, that's a red flag. If you drop a pot or pan or something, a big loud noise, and you see that it doesn't even faze them, that's a red flag as well. If you start seeing what we call self-stimulatory behavior, that they're toe walking a lot, or they're flapping their hands, or they're walking a lot, red flag. If they're lining up things, or if they always place things in a certain manner, and then if you remove something, or something gets there's a piece missing from their collection, and they have a huge meltdown, that's a red flag as well. So those are big red flags for autism. So typically they don't diagnose children on the autism spectrum before the age of 2, because of the developmental. They really need to have those kind of red flags in order to have those for psychologists to make those diagnoses. But if they do already have a sibling that has been already diagnosed, they might take a look at your child a little bit earlier. Like I've seen some children diagnosed as young as 18 and 15 months, which is always.
So are you saying that having an older sibling with autism is a better indicator? Is it?
It doesn't mean that the other one is going to have autism by any means, but there is a likelihood. Yeah, there could be a link. I've seen many families that have more than one children on the autism spectrum, some at different severities.
And how large is this spectrum? Because we hear it so much more often now, right? Autism is much more prevalent in our conversation, and yes, it's the spectrum.
It's
right?
a spectrum,
right?
It's a big spectrum, because you can have a high functioning child, right, that has very mild form of autism, such as PDD-NOS, or of Asperger's, right? So Asperger's typically are high functioning. Where they lag are their social skills, right? They have difficulties. They tend to perseverate on their own topics. They don't know how to have reciprocal conversations. Whereas there's other children that are nonverbal, and they're low functioning. There's just a lot of daily life skills that they're not able to do. They have a lot of difficulties in the areas of behavioral and emotional regulations. They don't have strong communication skills, and that just their everyday is very rigid and very routine based, and often difficult as well. Like it's really an umbrella.
So you're starting to monitor these checkpoints.
Yes.
And then from these checkpoints is then the quicker you're in treatment, or the quicker you're able to get help, or to be able to work on some of these. I mean, and I know that there's issues, and the faster that you're able to get them into the treatment, the better. Yes. And yet you were talking about an 18-month waiting list before, it's complicated.
It's very complicated, and there's so many changes that are happening right now.
Yeah.
And I won't even touch on that because
to even go into the school system and what's happening and losing, so I can't, because I will lose the entire podcast. We'll have to figure that one out on another time. And I do want to be able to hit on certain things that I think parents are searching for in terms of tools, tips to be able to work them through certain things.
Absolutely. So we'll stay on track on this. And there's a lot of different changes when we're talking about autism with government funding programs. Early, from my experience, I've been in the field for many years. Early intervention is key. the quicker you can get intervention, the quicker that we can start breaking down tasks and rebuilding them for these children, so that they're able to develop skills whereby they're lagging, so that the learning trajectory is not such of a large gap. And so with that intervention, it's providing consistency, it's providing clear expectation. You're learning how to do the follow through. Your children are learning how to appropriately ask for things. You're decreasing the meltdowns. You're developing, different areas. There's so much to go on, but early intervention is definitely key for that.
You can have a very healthy child with really powerful meltdowns.
Absolutely. I work with a lot of families that have children with no diagnosis, but have.
And what is the key to meltdowns? Like what are like these tantrums? Mm-hmm. How can parents help or alleviate or soothe them?
It really depends why the tantrums are happening. So there's 4 functions to behavior. A child's either having a meltdown because they're doing it for attention, they're doing it to escape a demand, they're doing it to access something, a tangible like an electronic or a cookie or something like that, or they're doing it for sensory. So internal sensory or something that they're doing physically that provides them with a sensory input.
Oftentimes, and I know you had mentioned, a child doesn't know the type of emotion they're experiencing. Mm-hmm. They can't differentiate between, nervous or anxious or, I think they have like happy or sad, but
they have the 5 general
Okay,
ones,
so what are our 5 general?
Happy, sad, excited, mad, and angry.
Those are the ones they understand.
Those are the ones that we tend to, they tend to learn through television, through books, right? They often talk about those emotions. They don't talk about anxious. They don't talk about frustrated. They don't talk about overwhelmed. They don't talk about nervous. They don't talk about the more specific emotions. And those are ones that parents need to teach their children. And we do that by modeling. So we can say, I'm feeling a little anxious today. This is the conversations that you have when your children are a little bit more older.
So for them to understand, because sometimes I was understanding that, you can have a tantrum, but it's really that they were anxious about a situation.
Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't they were trying to be bad. Mm-hmm. They just couldn't express the emotion that they were going through. Right. And we're so quick, I found, to just snap out of it, mm-hmm. And that just isn't always the case. And I know that you've established like a charting.
Yes.
Right. And that there's an emotion, there's a color, there's a how to deal with.
Yeah. So I've modified it. So I didn't develop it, but I've modified it. So it's called the 5-point scale or the zones of regulation. So a lot of schools use it. They started in grade 1 typically to use it. And they talk about zones by color because kids can associate with colors. So green is zone 1 and happy, and with red being, angry. And so what it does is it helps children to identify how they're feeling. They can redirect to it because, as I said before, visually, children absorb 80% visually. So visuals really help our children to understand all kinds of different things. But in terms of emotions, they understand. We had given them a detail of how that makes them feel. And then at the very end, what I've modified is, what can I do? So these are things that we have to learn and observe as parents. Okay, well, this is what makes my child calm. Or I've noticed that he gets so frustrated that, these are the things I do. So, he can go and escape and go and color, or he can go and kick his ball to have some emotional regulations.
So you've been able to, at least with the families that you work with, understand how each of these colors, levels, zones work, and what the tool is going to be to help them get through some of these stages.
Yes. And so there's an example of that on my website that parents can go and look at within a segment that I did. And it really speaks about how we can explain it with our children, how you can modify. Your child best. You can also ask your teachers, the teachers at school, what does my child normally do in order to calm themselves down at school? Or what do you do to help them? So that if we generalize between the home and the school environment, the consistency between the two is really going to help the child as well to self-regulate.
Okay. Then you have a child as they're getting older who they're quite good at expressing how they feel, and they're aggressive, or they're talking back, or they have behavioral, like parents are just throwing their hands up going, I have no idea how to deal with them.
Yeah. So again, it goes down to the why. What is the outcome of their behavior? Are they upset because you didn't give them the key to the car? Well, then let them have their meltdown and let them know why they can't have the keys to the car. You can't have the keys to the car because I need to go somewhere. And what I like to encourage parents to stop doing is over-explain. And particularly when the kids are younger. So we tend to want to reason with our children and explain to the point until we get, okay, mom, or something from them so that they understand. Really what that's doing is putting, what I could call as putting logs into a fire and making that fire get bigger, because they're not understanding what you're doing. Right now, they're in the moment. They're very upset. We need to keep it very short and sweet. So, no, you can't have a cookie right now because we're about to have dinner. And what I actually get asked a lot is, well, why do I have to tell my child why? Why can't I just say no? Because no's not enough of an answer. And we wouldn't appreciate being told no either, right? So you ask your boss, can I have these 2 weeks off in July? Yeah. And your boss responds, no. Would you be okay with that? Or would you be okay with your boss saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't have those 2 weeks off because two other people are already booked off and we'd be short-staffed, but you can have the following 2 weeks. Which one would you accept more, right? So it's a matter of just letting them know why. So that way, not only is it allowing them to understand why, but they also know for next time. And so they can build on those skills. Okay, so I can't have cookies close to dinner time, but I can have cookies after dinner. So, maybe you say, no, you can't have a cookie now because we're about to have dinner, but first you eat your dinner and then you can have a cookie after you finish.
Is that too much explanation?
Depends on how old they are, but you can break it down for them. So no, you can't have a cookie now because we're about to have dinner. And then you say, well, when can I have a cookie? Because that's generally the other follow-up. And say, well, first eat your dinner and then you can have a cookie.
So you can have a child that's very vocal, yells, expresses, and then you can have one that completely regresses, goes into their room, closes the door, retreats, nonverbal in a very different kind of way. Yeah. And do you see both equally?
Yeah, I do see both equally, whereby parents are unable to communicate with their children. I encourage families to have family dinners, if they can't have it every single night because shift work or just organized sports, soccer Uber mom, but having at least a set day of the week whereby you do have a meal together and have conversations. Loose conversations, right? One thing that I like to do with my family is the highlight and low light of the day. I always do that with the kids, and the kids always ask me to, and I love it because it makes me think as well. But I always ask them, and sometimes they might not have a low light, and sometimes they might not have a highlight, but it's a conversation builder. And if you do that every single day, it allows you to build that rapport so that they always feel like they can communicate with you. So if you start that on as in a younger age, then they'll be able to continue that as you get older. I also encourage families to have conversations on a car ride, right? So rather than them being on an electronic, having conversations, talk about what you want to do on the weekend, all kinds of different things. It just opens that line of communication as well with the children.
So highlight, low light.
Yeah, highlight, low light.
And conversations in cars. So not the music blaring.
Although sometimes,
well, I'm not allowed to sing. They're allowed to. Mom's not allowed to sing. But these are just kind of interesting tidbits that you've done with families.
Yes. The other thing is when they do communicate, and it might not be something that you're okay with, or it might have startled you, I always encourage families to say, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing will go a long way, particularly when they're under the age of 10 years old, and prep them for when they're older and they do have to have those tougher conversations with you. Because right now, children don't feel like they're being heard, and for so many different reasons, right? But we want them to always feel like they are being heard. thank you for sharing. Let's talk about that. Or thank you for sharing. I'm having a hard time, but I'm having a hard time understanding. Can we talk about this a little bit more? Or why are you feeling that way? Or thank you for bringing that up. So many different things. Thank you for sharing. We'll stop from that argument that you're going to have with a child and then allow you a segue to actually have a conversation. Whereas if a child says something to us and we start losing our marbles right away and just start, yelling or telling them why they're wrong, then they're going to shut down and their defense mechanisms are going to go up.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing.
Start that young.
Start that young.
So
you can even start that now. There's never a bad time to start. But if you start that young, it's fantastic. It will go a long way.
So that when you have that 15, 16-year-old that needs to bring up something, that they'll know first thing isn't going to be a blow up. It'll at least be
exactly.
I've got one line at least to get through before all hell.
Yeah, and you can always say that mommy needs a timeout. Or daddy, you don't have to respond to your kids right away. If it's something really overwhelming, we always feel like we have to be super mom and super dad and have an answer for everything. If we don't have an answer, or if we're too overwhelmed, or we think that we might react in a way that we're not going to be so proud of, because how many times does that happen? It happens. No judgment. We're all human. But we can say, I need a minute. I'll be ready to talk to you after.
What's your take on punishment? Or do you have a different view of punishment, or how it needs to be understood by all parties involved?
So I like to take a positive approach for everything.
Kind of like the terrific twos?
Kind of like terrific twos and fantastic fours. I like to work with a child's motivation. I'm not a believer in bribery. I'm a believer in working with a child's motivation so that it develops compliance for a child. I'm also a strong believer in natural consequences. So I'll use my children as an example. Both of my kids play competitive soccer, and they know that they can't be late because then they might get benched, or the coach is going to call them out, and they don't want to do that. But if they have things that they need to get done, so it's a first then strategy. First get that done, and then we'll go to soccer. But first get that done, and then go to soccer. But I'm going to be late then. Well, if you don't want to get late, first go and do that. And then, so it's always being consistent on what you're saying, so that you're not going to get into the argument. They're going to understand that what you're saying is the deal. And then the natural consequences, if they don't get it done, because it's not like I'm not giving them enough time. They have plenty of time. It's if they get stuck with the shiny object syndrome and they get distracted. They get to choose. So there has been time whereby they're late and they have to explain to the coach why they're late. Does it happen often? No, because they've learned from that, because they don't want that.
I have a feeling, though, that your kids haven't done things that have been deserving of punishment. But
yes,
I'm assuming that parents that are coming into your office, that for some, I just think go to your room isn't punishment anymore. There's way too much fun stuff in the room to go. When we had to go to our rooms, we had no TVs or electronics or anything like that.
No toys,
you were
nothing.
bored.
Yeah. Our room was meant to sleep. Mm-hmm. And, and I'm okay with that. Going to your room, timeouts are not effective. Timeouts are only effective if the natural consequence is going to be that they're going to miss out on something in the immediate. So the example that I like to use is if you're at a birthday party for a child and they're misbehaving, and we pull them away and we let them know why we're pulling them away. You're being too aggressive. You need to be using gentle hands. And because I've already, and say that, maybe you already told them ahead of time. Actually, can we just backstep that actually? Mm-hmm. So before going to a birthday party or anywhere new, I always encourage families to state what the expectations are in advance. Because it's not fair to a child that is extremely excited to, once they get there, they do something, they get called out on it, or they get pulled away because you're shocked that they were aggressive. That's not fair to the child because they're really excited. So before going to the birthday party, say, okay, we're gonna go to Sarah's birthday party, and just remember, at a birthday party is gonna be a lot of loud music. You guys are going to play tag and all those kind of things, but remember, you guys need to use gentle hands, okay? And you can be excited and stuff like that, but let's be kind with our words, and letting them know what those expectations are in advance. And so, before you go in and say, okay guys, so what are the rules, and they repeat it to you, if they're old enough to repeat it. If they're not old enough to repeat it, you just remind them again before going in. Then if something happens at the birthday party, you can call them out on it and say, okay, remember, we were supposed to be using our gentle hands. We're going to go and have some time to ourselves to calm down, and then you can join back in. The natural consequence is that they're being pulled away from something that they're really enjoying.
But a timeout just at home when they're not missing out on anything doesn't work. It
doesn't work. It gets replaced with other things. They're not reflecting on anything, right? They're keeping themselves occupied. They might be singing a song in their head. The timeout is supposed to be a time whereby they're self-reflecting. Our children are not self-reflecting during that time, and there's no real consequence. They go back to what they want afterwards, depending on how the parents handle the timeout.
Do you find that's oftentimes people are coming into the office for that?
Yeah, so a lot of times they're giving their child time out, but then afterwards they hug it out afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But it really depends on why they got the hug out, why they got the time out to begin with. Like, should we be giving our child a lot of attention afterwards? Not so much. What I always encourage is that let them come out of it if you're going to do a timeout, because like I said, no judgment on my part, but I do encourage that if you are going to do a timeout, let them go back and do something, have an opportunity to do something appropriately. And once they're on task, then start showing. You can give them the affection or call them out and say, I really like the way you're playing with your toys now, and give that positive reinforcement.
Okay, but then you have a kid. Let's go 15. We have only a couple minutes left too. So we got like 15-year-old dressed in black eyeliner, black thing, hating, like going with the death, let's go with the dark. They're living the dark phase.
Yeah. Who doesn't do that? I did that stage.
So go out and buy them the black eyeliner.
Okay, I did not wear a black trench coat.
Yeah.
I did dye my hair black. And wore black for a bit. I think it was my Smashing Pumpkin days. I still love the Smashing Pumpkins though. But kids go and try and fit in different groups, especially in high school, right? So we don't want to put the alarms on right away. When they're trying something, if it's no self-harm to themselves or to others, it's a self-discovery time. So it is like, skating on thin ice, or walking on thin ice, however that expression goes, because we want to give them an opportunity to discover themselves, but then we want to have that open communication with them as well.
So thank you for sharing the fact that you're going to shave your head, or thank you for sharing the fact that you're going to dye your hair pink or black. Like,
you can
how much of this are we using your other?
So thank you for sharing when they're having a conversation. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's a good decision, and here's why. Or if you were to shave your head, okay, so you want to shave your head. Why do you want to shave your head?
Because I want to piss you off.
Okay, so if you want, if it's just because they want to if that's honestly their answer, then we have to dive in deeper and see where that attachment has failed us.
What if you're noticing the child is dealing with peer pressure? They're doing or making decisions not based on what they would like, but what their peers are doing.
So this is where social media does come in handy. So I always encourage family to be attached to their child's Instagram account or whatever accounts that are out there as well, and just monitor, because that's a good red flag.
Oh, Sylvia, they then go and create secret accounts.
Oh, I know, and then you go and find their secret accounts because they get tagged and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it is a little bit challenging, but even though you were not able to see those secret accounts, you're able to look at other friends. Say Instagram stories, which is now a thing. No one puts pictures anymore. They just do Instagram because they disappear. So you have to go in there and just see the way that other children are conducting themselves, because true colors, you get a sense of where peer pressure, if your child starts really changing the way that they're acting, you can kind of see where things are. If they're asking to do things that are out of the ordinary, having those conversations with them to determine what is it that they want to do, and making sure that you have that open communication with your children is really, really key. But you are going to have teenagers that are going to rebel. You're going to have teenagers that are going to, have colorful words for you. It's really having, what are the consequences for that? Is that acceptable? And, if a child were to speak to me, and like, even if one of my kids at this age, at 12 and 10, were to speak to them, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. That's not the way you speak to me. You can either try again, or you can go to, and I always say, you can go and do this or this and then come back to me. It won't be anything reinforcing, but they'll come back to me. Or there's going to be a consequence for it if it's something that comes up again afterwards. Because we have to teach them right off the bat that that's not acceptable, and we're not going to be taking that kind of behavior.
But there could be kids that have, and really quickly, because you had mentioned, like, there are kids in kindergarten who are aggressively, aggression, physical aggression has become much more of a trait than ever before.
Yeah, especially in kindergarten and grade 1. It's incredible how many children are aggressive in kindergarten and grade 1. It is such a far cry from what we experienced growing up. That is a matter of consequence and how we handle things, and if we're negatively reinforcing. Unfortunately, we only have an hour to speak about, so it goes so much deeper, but we really have to have, so when we're talking about the reason there's 4 functions of behavior, we have to also look at what's maintaining the behavior. So if we're giving into a behavior, if we're allowing them to do something and brushing it off, if we're giggling at them when after they've done something because it's not appropriate, but you're just going to try and laugh it off, those kind of things reinforce it. If they break something and then you're the one cleaning it up afterwards, as opposed to them cleaning up, reinforcing, that's negatively reinforcing. There's so many different things. So it's really a matter of, when they're younger, establishing clear expectations and boundaries for these children. Boundaries is what's lacking.
Okay, the boundaries and jumping on a problem. If they think it's going to go away, it's not.
No.
So like if you're thinking, oh, that's a phase, it's a phase. Yeah. It's not. So when you recognize that behavior is starting, get on it ASAP. And if you can't get on it yourself, like, this is where you come in, right? Is like having a behavior specialist work with the family to be able to diminish it quickly. Yeah. So everyone thinks it's just a phase, it'll pass, and that's not it. And then my last question, as we were kind of going through the stages, we are dealing much more now with sexual identity, conversations, as to when sexual activity is starting. That all seems to kind of have gotten younger and younger as well. And so when are you seeing the discussions happening now with families?
Well, now that they incorporated that part of their health plan, health in school, I had the conversation with my kids prior to them having exposed in the school. And the reason being, some children are very oblivious, and where other children are more well-informed. And so just having that conversation with your children, whether it be in a form of a book, or there's some really great books at Chapters that explain, that either read with your kids or allow them to read.
Give examples.
Actually, American Girl has a really great one for girls. It talks about puberty, how their body is going to be changing. So there's a part 1 book, and then the part 2 book is all about the whole sex ed. And it's really well put together. What I did for my daughter is I paperclipped a section that I said, you can read the whole book on your own, because I gave her the option, do you want to read it with me, or do you read on your own? She chose to read it on her own. I said, okay, but this section here, this is the one section that I want to read with you. And it was all about sexual intercourse. And so we did have that one-on-one time, and we read that together.
And what age were you doing that?
She was in grade 5.
Okay, so she was 11.
11, yeah. And she was, didn't really want to talk about it, but I told her she can ask any questions that she had for me, either now or later.
But you found that was the appropriate age to be able to have this discussion.
Yeah, well, because our girls are having their menstruation so much earlier, grade 4. is great. Like even every time I say that, it's just flabbergasting. But grade 4, they're starting to have their menstrual cycle. And so they need to be aware, they need to be educated. They can't be educated by their friends that don't know much more than them. And so the more we educate our children, the more they're going to feel comfortable, the less they're going to get in trouble. And, air quotes there. But they need to be informed and need to know that they can come to you for any questions that they have and feel comfortable about it.
A grade 4, or a young girl hitting a menstrual cycle earlier, or a young boy at 11 thinking that he's not thinking about the girls, he's thinking about the boys. Like those are different discussions to be having at these younger ages, and yet we are having them. Yeah,
we're having them. And that's when I say as well, like keeping that line of communication open. If you see anything that might be concerning to you, if you think that your child might be gay, or that is trying to have some self-identity, try and develop those conversations with them. Ask them, how are things going at school? Who are you hanging out with? I find that asking what they've done at school, even at a young age, to start doing that. So rather than say, how was your day? Be more specific. Like, what did you do at recess? Who did you hang out with? Starting when those conversations, when they're younger, is going to be easier to ask them questions when they're in high school. So what do you guys do at recess now? Or during your break? It's not called recess anymore, Mom. What do you guys do during your break? Who are you hanging out with? And if you know certain friends, are you still hanging out with so-and-so? If they say no, say, oh, okay, I thought you guys were good friends. Did something happen there? Start trying, you don't want to be picking on them for trying to, absorb, get too much information out of them, and they feel like they're being interrogated. It really has to be like, oh, did you guys have a falling out? Like something more natural, so that they start feeling a little bit more comfortable with sharing that.
But more direct questions, so that it's not how was school today, and then it's like, fine. Yeah. And then end a conversation.
Exactly. You need to give something whereby they have to provide an explanation. Right? Because once we get into those one-word answers, we know that our child is, it's a red flag that there could be other things, because we don't want to start getting them to shut down on us. That's what number one thing that we as parents want to avoid, is our children shutting down on us. So really opening up those conversations, always providing them with some sort of a question or a comment that should receive an answer for it, so that we can continue the conversation.
I wish that I could continue the conversation, but I'm going to take a wild guess and go, oh my God. Sorry, Veronica. She kind of gave me that 10-minute warning 20 minutes ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
People can go check out. I mean, there's so many things that are on the website. There's videos that you had done on CTV Morning Live. We just missed each other in terms of those years. But the different things that you're able to focus on with parents, families, and children. So Success and Steps, is that the best place? Okay.
Successandsteps.ca is the best place to reach me. I post a lot of things always on my website, Facebook page. I have an Instagram page as well, but the website's the best thing to contact me. Free consultation, just to get a sense, it's not always the right fit for me or the family. If I feel as though this is not where you should be at right now, I'll provide an external resource to what I think
there needs to be more of a medical intervention, or more.
Yeah, or you really need a speech language pathologist, or I don't handle those type of things, but this is an area whereby I can provide you with, or if parents are looking for more for sleep that's not associated to behavior, then there's quite a few sleep consultants that I can refer to that I've worked side by side too.
But in having that original intake conversation, you're able to direct them. Yeah, because it could be they think it's complicated, but it could be we're dealing with a speech issue.
Yeah.
Or we're just dealing with a sleep issue.
Yeah.
That is probably what a parent is like, oh, okay, we can we can handle that one.
Exactly. And also get a sense of, what, you just need a few sessions with me. And because it sounds like you're on the right page, but let's just shape a few things but you'll be on your way quite nicely.
And is it usually with the child?
No, it's without. So my focus is focusing on providing the parents with the tools and strategies, because at the end of the day, as a therapist, that's why I don't work with the kids anymore, because other than my situation, but working with the kids was extremely rewarding, but at the end of the day, they'd go back to their parents, and the parents wouldn't have the tools in order to help their children. So I want to provide the parents with the confidence and
have the parents ever come back to you and said, "My kid's wondering what's going on"?
Oh, all the time.
Like the parents are going to these sessions, and all of a sudden the kid's going, "What's going on here?"
Oh yeah, and we get what's called an extinction burst. So the kids will always try and do what worked for them before, and then as soon as the parents start putting strategies in place, the kids will up it one notch or maybe 2 notches. And I always tell parents, if you're having a hard time implementing the strategies at this time, just reach out to me. Just send me an email. I'll provide you with support, because this is the crucial peak whereby you need to be consistent, because you need to let them know.
Because they could get worse before it gets better, especially if they realize the parents are catching on.
It always gets worse before it gets better. And this is why a lot of strategies, a lot of parents end up throwing in the towel at that point. But really, if we understand the why and what's maintaining it, which I help parents to understand, and we apply the right strategy, it will work. It's just a matter of how determined your child is to prove, like try to work against you. But it will work. And I've worked with families with very extreme situations and challenges. And I remember one mom that said, "My kids are never going to be able to sleep in their own bed." And they totally sleep in their own bed now. Twins. So, and they're older, and just a lot of challenges, and a lot of flying colors before, but now things are going well with the consistency and the follow through.
There's lots of different things that can be implemented. It's just a matter of having the discussion and having parents on board.
Having parents on board, yeah, absolutely.
The big thing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having
Great
me.
for sharing some of the stories and the strategies. So I'm going to say thanks for sharing.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you for sharing as I head back
it.
home. Yes. And that's a wrap on this episode of Living Your Life with Lianne Laing. As always, please thank you for liking, subscribing, sharing, letting other people know about the podcast. It's definitely helped to see this podcast grow in numbers and in downloads and in an audience. So really appreciate it. Sylvia, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.